Top the mill of the day to you boys and girls. We're at the bench in the shop for another little narrative session, and today for your viewing pleasure we're going to be looking at an ms462, one of the last of its kind, and we're going to be looking at an ms462, new kid on the block. Throwing the disclaimers out right off the bat. This is obviously going to be a narrative since we're at the bench in the shop. If you're interested in details and minutia, this might be a video that interests you. If you're not a knuckle/gearhead like myself, you might find this to be tedious and boring, but at least I've been warning you in the beginning. I may slur or stammer. I call that slammering my speech in this process. Please forgive me if I do that. Check the description for any clarifications and or qualifications or corrections. I'm only human. I make mistakes in this life. I'm the biggest mistake maker that I know, actually. So there you go with that one. My contact information is generally in the description area, at least for the last 2-3 years. Most of the videos, I think, have contact information in the description. So if you need to get a hold of me for, I field a lot of inquiries about all kinds of stuff. But since I know a little bit about falling timber and a little bit about working on saws. So anyway, segued off there. Sorry, back on track. Now that we've taken care of that part of the operation, so this is going to be probably something I'm going to end up having to splice together because I'm thinking that I'm not going to be able to get through this whole operation. My scales are on the bench. We're going to be weighing stuff in this process. You're going to have to trust me that I can actually read the numbers accurately. So there you go. I don't even know where to start. So my first experience with a 462 was in November of 2017. I ran it in stock form against the stock 461. It wasn't these two saws right here. But they're both rated, both the European version and the North American, Western United States, or all of the United States, I guess, at 6.0 horsepower. Now, the reason I brought that up is because sometimes you'll see where the European saws are rated at a 10th more horsepower. The 661 is 7.3 in Europe, and it's 7.2 in the States. That's an example. The 660 was rated at 7.1 over there and 7.0 over here. I'm not sure if they ran them on the same dyno. Actually, I'm assuming that they did that, but I don't know for sure. The other thing that I guess that's important, why I think that that is a slight differential between those two saws, the exhaust doesn't deal with the spark arresting part of the equation in the European saws like it does in the States. So I'm thinking that that's where the differential comes into play, since I haven't seen where cylinder design or port timing or anything's off between the saws that are European versus the States or the North American saws, I guess. So we kind of segued off. I guess we'll get back on track. Ran them with a 32. They run about the same. They don't run about the same. The timed runs were about the same, although I didn't cut them completely off, so it's hard to tell, but they were relatively close. It wasn't like one was running away with itself, just leaving the other one in the dust. They were relatively close. 6.0 horsepower, 6.0 horsepower. If you want to talk about bore and stroke for a second, 52 millimeter bore by a 36 millimeter stroke gives you 7.45 cc's. We have a 52 millimeter bore and a 34 millimeter stroke, and that gives you 72.0, I think it is, cc's. 72.2, 76.5 essentially. So a little bit bigger, and they have about the same amount of horsepower. Now there's a reason that is the way that it is. We have a first gen, the 461, and we have a second gen 462 emissions saw differential between these two. We're using exhaust to stratify in the 461. We're using raw air to stratify in the 462. So we're probably going to have to look at the cylinders, but I will say that we're doing some miking earlier. I was checking both of these saws out, at least the cylinder assemblies, and you can see we're forgetting that we left the cylinder assembly for the 461 over on the service cart. But anyway, at least you know I'm not just talking out my rear. I actually check them out. So with that being said, I guess if we stick with more of a standard type bench talk breakdown, and let's throw the weights out. I fall timber, and so I deal with the 3/4 or the wrap version saws. I like the big kid dogs and the big kid style clutch covers for chip management. We've kind of talked about there's a couple different versions for both of these. If we want to talk about weights for a second, I think in West Coast trim it's 15.7. I'm not sure if there's any helium added to the tank at that point. I'm pretty sure that it's not. At least in this saw, 15.7 in West Coast version. Big kid dogs, wrap handlebars, and the big clutch cover. Which I will mention that the old style clutch cover on the Stihl chainsaws was definitely the industry standard for chip management. I've never seen anything any better anywhere ever. It's nice. It's canted away as it comes out. It's got a big old fatty dust flap chip deflector. I don't know why they got away from that, actually. The 64s had those for years, and the 64s came out in about 84, I think it was. And so anyway, if we look at that aspect of it, we will go kind of like that country and western song, like what were they thinking when they designed in this system? And we see it definitely has a diminutive dust flap. You're not going to have too many successful chain throws in this operation before that needs to go away. We're going to have buildup in here, and it's not canted out. So cool looking. I call it the tough guy looking clutch cover for sure. Looks pretty burly, but I don't think the function is quite like it used to be. That's just my personal opinion, but I'm kind of picky, I guess. So if we start looking at some of the other stuff, they changed the design completely in the Stihl 462 from what had been the industry norm for them for years and years and years, and one-piece cylinder carb box cover. That hasn't been the norm for them forever and ever and ever. They had like the 56 and stuff like that back in the early 80s. Some of those saws had that one-piece big old metal cover on top. Then they went to the two-piece design when they came up with the 64. And they had an independent cylinder cover and air cleaner cover. So that was pretty much the norm for years and years and years. So, yeah. I did take a look at the pull starter covers, and quite a bit bigger in the 462. Let's take a little gander at what she weighs. And we come up with 10.6 ounces, suspiciously close to the same looking pulley, actually has the same part number. Imagine that. Why would you change something that works good? But they're using the guide, air guide that's attached in there. It's pretty sweet. I kind of like that versus what you see on the Husqvarnas. Back on track, we're going to weigh the 461, and it weighs 10.8 ounces. So let's look at the handlebars real quick before I forget. They're over here on the parts disposal bench. And so the 462, I kind of like, personally I like the KISS method. 4 bolts, so this falls off in your hands. This is kind of cool. This is not the KISS method on the 462. It's a process to get the handlebars off. Now, it's probably a little bit better up in the front as far as structurally sound. It's probably a little beefier. It's a lot wider, the tank is, than they used to be up in the front. So it'll probably be a little bit better in a rollover situation. But it's not good for taking apart. But if we look at the difference, the swoop-de-doo, which I call this part right here, is a little bit different in the 462. I actually like it. It's got a little bit better feel to it than what we see on the 461. It's out a little bit further, and it doesn't swoop around quite as much. Because a lot of times out on the West Coast, you get in a situation where you'll be holding on like right here. It's just the way it goes. So the ground's kind of gnarly sometimes, and it just might be what you're doing. So I did appreciate the new design shape-wise of the handlebars, not necessarily the attachment method. So we'll talk about and the air cleaners. And so the new style is a quarter twist kind of a thing. So it's got a rubber lip around here that seals on this part here that's inside basically, and they get loose pretty quick. So yeah, cartridge style though, smaller surface area I would imagine. HD2, they flow about 77 CFM, I think that is what the factory rating is for those. So if we look underneath, we see a whole bunch of plastic stuff. So I don't forget again, there's a ram air system that's on the 462. So they're trying to do what the air injection process has been doing on the Husqvarnas for years. I don't know if the patent ran out or somebody's paying somebody for the process to use that concept, but the 462 has that system now. This is actually inside the air cleaner. The baffle system goes inside there, air flows down through and into the carburetor. So pretty lightweight operation. In West Coast trim, it's 13.9 pounds, 15.7 pounds, so it's quite a bit lighter. Kind of an interesting concept there. Everything's super lightweight. This is the part that separates the cylinder from the carburetor, and it weighs nothing. 1.1 ounces. So super duty lightweight. If we talk about the power again, so I kind of like the low end. You can tell that the 461 has a little bit more low end. It definitely has way more potential. We'll get into the cylinders a little bit in a minute and kind of talk about why that is. And we're going to do kind of a build. We ran this against the stock one, then we're going to build this and run it against a stock 461. So in stock form, and we ran these two, they're about the same. We're going to build this one, run it against the stock 461, and then we're going to build the 461, and we're going to watch the 461 annihilate the 462. In build form, it's going to win. Both built, it's not going to win. And we are going to fit this particular saw with the Mondo K&N, gets more airflow going on, which is going to help a little bit. Picks up a second or two in a 24-inch cut. Possibly somewhere around in there, getting a little bit more airflow, but we're still going to watch this saw get stomped by this saw. Anyway, so let's look at the carburetors, I guess, real quick, and see that because we have a adjustable type carburetor, and we have an antronic type carburetor. So there's a solenoid that's metering the fuel. It's underneath right here. In this process, dual magnet system on the flywheel, monitoring the speed of the crank, metering the fuel accordingly. Now we mentioned it's got an air leak, factory air leak. You can call it whatever you want, that's what it is. It comes out of the box with an air leak because we're stuffing raw air in through this, where the transfer ports dump out in across the top of the cylinder. We're actually creating a barrier with raw air in the 462. There's a barrier of exhaust. We're stratifying with exhaust in the 461. So the Venturi is actually split. This one, they're about 17.5, I think it is, millimeters generally. I think that's what they are. This one I don't really know what to tell you about measuring because it's split. I don't know if we're going to be able to see that or not. Let's see if we can get it so you can see down in there. I don't know if you can see. It's actually cast. Husqvarna uses a little plastic piece in there, but the bottom part of the Venturi is actually separated from the top part, and the shutters actually interact. There's a recess in the shutter cast in there, and basically close the top to the bottom from intermixing. And we can see they changed the little ring that goes into the start of in the boot intake manifold, splitting it as it goes out a little bit further. So definitely different in that aspect. We're relatively close to the same in the concept of the intake manifolds. They both have the little ridges in there, but they only have the ridges in where the air and fuel mixture. They don't have it on the stratification side in the 462. It's all encompassing because it's all charge going in the 461. Now you can see there's quite a bit of difference in there. The way that's designed, more flow capability here. That's why I say the 461 is going to spank the 462 in built form for sure. So we took a look at those. We didn't take a look at the flange. This is what in the 461, the air cleaner goes on like that. The flange is in there like that, and it mounts to the process. So a little bit different air delivery method. So if we take a look at the cylinder, that's really going to kind of spell it out. Now we've talked about these before in I think quite a few videos, and we're going to try to help with the light not blind you completely. So if we look down in there, really wide transfer ports across the side of the cylinder, but they're shaped like this, and there's kind of a cavity in there the way they're designed, and so they're trying to let the exhaust get in there and kind of stay in there a little bit and keep a little bit of a barrier and keep the charge from getting across the top of the piston, keep it slow it down just a fuzz. So that's the concept. So but we have a nice big hole, pretty round, where it goes in to the back of the cylinder on the start of the intake circuit and changes to oblong really quickly. We looked at the width of the exhaust ports, really wide, which is cool about it. Evacuating the gases pretty quick, the spent gases anyway, but there's not a lot of duration in there, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. And got a decent shaped combustion chamber in there. It's actually not too bad. One of the things that I've noticed in these cylinders is if you look in there, I'm hoping that you can see the castings kind of there's a lot of bleed over in there, so crap gets stuck in there. On my saws, I take and auger that out of there. So, but if we look at the exhaust coming out, it's more rectangular shaped, so it goes from kind of oblong, changing it. That's going to have an effect with the sound wave coming back in there and dispersing the sound wave. trying to create a little bit of a barrier as well, I would imagine. And the other thing I noticed, you look at the start of the transfer port circuit, it's kind of funky the way it's shaped. One of the things I'm going to try is a aftermarket easy saw version. It comes with a highway version piston, and so I'm going to try this. This is going to be a little bit of test mule. It's got really rough casting. It's really rough casting there. You can't use the standard bolts unless you auger out some material on the front, because the casting is shaped like a little triangular shaped right here. It basically goes up as it goes toward the center. The other thing I noticed is that when you have the cooling plate on there, it has a tendency to have a problem and interrupt the position. There's a big gap here because this little tang sticks out too far, so you got to modify that. It's in the process. As far as the transfer ports go, if we look down in there, we can see they're a little bit nicer. They're a little bit more rounded. I don't know if you can see down in there or not. They're a little more rounded. And so, but it's got a pretty small combustion chamber. The exhaust port's nice and wide. It's basically, it's kind of a carbon copy shape-wise to what we see with the standard version. 461 OEM fitment. If we look at the 462, we can see that it's kind of radical in the fin design. We're trying to do a lot of cooling with the process, which makes perfect sense since we're stratifying this system with raw air. It's going to run really hot, and yeah. So yeah, you can see how small the intake start into the cylinder is. Very small where the charge goes through. The raw air is going in on top. So definitely advantage 461. Again, stock form they run about the same. Zip form, this saw is going to stomp all over it. That's just the way it is, because the potential's with the 461. Weight-wise, giving up a lot. Arborist application, probably be thinking about that saw. Production, stumping, just all-out power, you're thinking about this saw. And so we got enough time. Again, we look at the circuit coming in there, we can see it's still kind of rounded though, which is actually nice. If we look down in there, we can see it's quad loop kind of system, real wide. We can see how wide that stratification port is. It's the one that's closest to my finger, the one that's lower in the cylinder. And kind of rounded, not so squarish transfer ports though, like we see in the 461, which that's kind of nice. If we look at the start of the transfer port circuit in the cylinder, we can see it's consistent. The shape is nice. It's kind of small, but if we look down in there, we can see the exhaust port's actually really wide, which is really nice. So, and they did use some reversion concepts in this particular design, but they canted the exhaust as it's coming out of the cylinder, but it's really small. The 661 is the same. It's really small. Again, we're working on keeping emissions to a minimum in this process, and we're going to have to pause. Okay, so we got to take a little bit of a look at the cylinder. 462 exhaust, the ports tilted a little bit, trying to get it to spin, I would imagine. And so yeah, we talked about some stuff. If we compare the gasket stuff, cooling plate on the two saws, we see a lightweight aluminum and a fiber gasket versus a metal cooling plate and a metal gasket. We'll just take a real quick look at the weights. .7 of an ounce, 1.5, so basically twice as much. So you can see like where weight savings has been part of the process. We're thinking about it, we're doing it. We'll look at the mufflers real quick. Stainless, lightweight. It weighs 10 ounces. 461 comes in at 14.6 ounces. So 2 ounces here, an ounce here. Pretty soon in the end, you get almost 2 pounds of weight savings. So they're both running baffles. This is noticeably more lightweight though. Different concept, but both running baffles. It's actually got a bigger hole, but this one has a slit, so they're trying to diffuse the exhaust. Net, you're probably getting about the same amount of flow coming out. So there you go on that one. Okay, so now we're going to get down to the pistons for a second. So one of the things that I looked at, we'll look at the design of the piston real quick. So the fresh air is coming in right here. There's a dead port right below the bottom ringland, and we're stuffing raw air into the start of the transfer port circuit. It comes down, it loads up, it's creating a vacuum in there, I guess, essentially, and goes up. It's trying to stuff the raw air into the start of the transfer port circuit and create that barrier. So one of the things we're looking at is, what does this thing weigh? 4.1 ounces. The cool thing about it is the shape of it. I think it's nice. It's kind of a little bit of a cavity, but there's a lot of the way this is designed, it's going to let you do a better job stuffing, just the way it's shaped. So I thought that was kind of cool. If we look at the 461, we see that it weighs 3.6 ounces. So not bad. I did do some miking on these, and I found that this piston is round, and it only tapers from, we've talked about how they're kind of barrel shaped. They're a little bit more narrow, a little bit wider, bigger in diameter, and then they kind of get smaller as they go. A lot of times they'll stay relatively consistent till about right here. There's no rhyme or reason, but they call them barrel shaped. They're not actually like this. They're kind of like this. But it's same diameter any way you measure across the dome. So this one really doesn't have any ovality to it, I guess. I don't know if that's correct in the pronunciation, but conceptually. This one's a little bit different. It's about 5/1000ths in difference. The differential from the widest to the most narrow part is about 5/1000ths, and this piston's is like 7/1000ths. There is a little bit of a difference in the design. This one is a little bit oval. I think it's, I'm trying to remember now, I think it's 7/1000ths of difference. Again, we're running a lot hotter in the process, going to allow for more thermal expansion, but I think it's about 3/1000ths or something, maybe 3/10,000ths. I can't remember now. It's, yeah, something like that, about 3/10,000ths. It's almost round, but not quite. So there's a little bit, it's a little bit wider here than it is here. It's allowing for more expansion because the thing's running hot. The Amtronic system, actually, the air-to-fuel ratio is really lean. It is, I've heard 14.7 to 1. Standard saws, you run them around, hopefully around 13 to 1. I've heard as high as 17 to 1 in the Amtronic saws. That's running really lean. I harp on mix oil a lot. Tolerance-wise, these range from 3.1 to 3.4, just depending. These ones are ranging about 3.7 to 3.8. That's rattling around in there, basically. You better warm them up good before you get rolling. And you better have a super dense mix oil, help take up some of the slack. Not to mention you want a oil that has good film strength, and you want an oil that has good viscosity to handle like the heat in the process. If we take a look at inside here, so they redesigned the cases, obviously. So that was, you know, a must-do if you're going to shed almost 2 pounds. They're using a little piece of aluminum that's bolted in here for stuffing the air underneath the piston out toward the front, since here's the start of the transfer port circuit. Standard poly flywheel that's on like the 460. Conceptually, you know, they changed this design a little bit from the 460, but not too much. One thing we'll notice is it's got a pretty small wrist pin bearing. What did we come up with? 3.6 ounces. And we got about 2/10, and we came up with 4.1, I think it is, and the bearing's actually 3/10. Now, why that's significant is the size. I like the way they designed the 462 wrist pin bearing. I mean, there's weight savings, but there's places not to save weight. That would be a place. I thought that was pretty cool. If we take a look at the 462, we see that what they did with the little stuffer piece is it's actually cast into the crankcase, and the thing I noticed just now is there's an air gap in there. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's actually an air gap in there. There's no gasket up into there. You can see, though, that the gasket comes all the way, the case gasket anyway, comes all the way up to right here. Thought that was interesting, trying to split the charge. Definitely a different operation going in here. We're taking up some volume in the crankcase, so your pumping ratio is going to be a little bit better probably in this operation than what we see in the 462. Now early on, or excuse me, the 461, early on the 461 cylinders had a dual transfer port design. They had the old style where they hook around from the side like in a 460, and they had the kind that came around in the front. They had those early cylinders. That's why we see these recesses in the cases, and then they phased that cylinder out, and now they do just the old style right there. So we talked about a whole bunch of stuff. I checked the cylinders out with the bore gauge quite a bit. It's about 6.5 to 7/10 of a thousandths, so that would be 6.5 to 7/10,000ths. Smaller in the top. It's not exactly the same. It's about 3/10 more narrow across the side. This is the 462 cylinder than it is across the back. If we look in the 461, a lot of times they were having some problems and they'd be a little bit tight on this side right here. They're actually, it's actually pretty good all across the back, and you don't see the associated wear from that situation. It's only about 2/10,000ths more narrow here, and it's only in the bottom, it's only about 2/10,000ths by 1/10,000ths, where we had quite a bit more down there. So I'm not sure if that has to do with the heat while we're doing it that way. I'm not exactly positive, in all honesty, but that's kind of one thing that's going on right there. And so I think that we've kind of covered everything that I need to cover in this process. It's a little bit sporadic as we're kind of bouncing around. Again, there's some things about both saws that are really awesome. You kind of have to figure out what you need from your saw and go from there, although these are NLA at this point. Get them while they're hot, I guess. Since it went out of production at the end of last year, from everything that I can tell at this point. Anyway, covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you found this to be interesting. Kind of blathering on and on. I find this stuff to be kind of interesting myself personally, having used saws for years and years, and then figuring out like how to make them actually tick a little bit better. We're going to do some work with the aftermarket cylinder assembly. I didn't weigh that piston, and we should do that. The highway brand. comes out at. 3.7. So it's kind of a carbon copy, and it's pretty light. Okay, so one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I forgot to mention, we're done building the 461 at the moment, and we're going to start bolting together the 462, have a little saw-off session tomorrow. But anyway, we were kind of looking at the crankcase a little bit, and I forgot to mention something that I thought was pretty cool, and that is the honeycomb effect that they did, they being the engineers, when they even designed the cases. We were talking about that lightweight concept. There are little areas that have holes in them, and they serve nothing more than to be less weight. So definitely somebody was up late on multiple occasions in the process during the design of this saw, trying to get rid of some serious weight. I mentioned in a video, I don't know when it was posted, quite a while ago, 6 months anyway, I was running this thing with a 30-inch bar Oregon lightweight. With a 32, the power head is so lightweight, you dog it in and leave it running, it'll actually bounce off the log and hit the deck. So lightweight is awesome. There is such a thing as too lightweight, though, I guess, from my perspective. So we'll get this spliced in and continue the saga with this build operation. So there you go. Anyway, we kind of went on and on. Sorry it's been taking so long to get everything organized, but that's just the way it goes sometimes for me. One-man band out on the West Coast. So anyway, thanks for watching this session. Hope you have a blessed day wherever you might be on God's green earth. Thanks for watching.